Joining us is former New York Congresswoman, Independent Women's Forum Board of Directors member Nan Hayworth. Nan, Congresswoman, it's great to see you as always. I'll point out, though, that Rand Paul is still a no on Gina Haspel, and Senator John McCain encouraged his colleagues to reject Haspel. They are not doing it, and we do have Democrats getting on board.
Yeah, which is a great thing. And, of course, Dagan, the Democrats from red states and those from states where they can afford politically to swing a bit toward the Republican nominee, that's why you see them turning that way. I think they all recognize that there's been a big outcry about the hypocrisy of Democrats who voted previously for the CIA director, I think it was Brennan, who was number 4 in the agency when they were doing waterboarding. Gina Haspel was far inferior to him in the ranks, and so to oppose her on the basis of that policy seems hypocritical at best. So I'm glad to see that they're coming around because she's a very worthy nominee.
Doctor, I think her confirmation vote was won when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed came out against her.
Right, yes.
Seems like an
exactly.
argument you want to have.
Yes. As a Republican, I was rather hopeful that perhaps they would, the Democrats would cry for him to come and testify. I think that would have been maybe even better. But yeah, she's definitely, especially when we talk about women, right? Here is a worthy woman who happens to be a Republican, and it looks unseemly indeed to have voted for the man.
I just feel like you always have to look at it from the opposite perspective. If this woman was sitting there and nominated by a Democrat and she was treated the way that she has been treated, the things said about her by Democrats, then there would be, by Republicans, then it would be massive outrage, and it would be leading every mainstream media newscast. She would be on the front page of newspapers about the persecution of this woman.
Absolutely.
The continuing war on women.
That's right. And well, this was Kamala Harris's, typical arrogant grandstanding, which was just purely political. And that is truly offensive. And thinking people, we need a thinking electorate. Thinking people listening to someone like Kamala Harris assailing Gina Haspel about the morality of a policy that she had nothing to do with is just really stunning.
No, as women, we want women who have earned the job to get the job.
Precisely.
Who have put in this case, Gina Haspel will almost certainly be the next CIA director. Based on the vote count from Fox News yesterday, if McCain doesn't vote, Paul remains no, and even Jeff Flake, if he turns out to be a nay, Haspel should secure at least 52 yeas.
And McCain and Flake, I think, unfortunately, their votes are also tainted there by a real opposition to the president, and Gina Haspel is the recipient of that.
Let's switch gears to the deadly clashes on the Gaza border yesterday. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley slamming calls for an investigation into Israel's strategy in dealing with the violent protests, blaming Hamas terrorists for the recent attacks.
Those who suggest that the Gaza violence has anything to do with the location of the American embassy are sorely mistaken. Rather, the violence comes from those who reject the existence of the state of Israel in any location.
Following her statement, she walked out of the chamber before the Palestinian representative to the council gave his remarks. Congresswoman Hayworth, your take on this and Haley's strength. Somebody on the couch on Outnumbered yesterday said that Nikki Haley is a great interpreter in a more eloquent way of the way that Donald Trump speaks and thinks.
Yes. She, another great woman in public service, promoted to that position, of course, by President Trump, to his credit. Yes, Nikki Haley is dignified, she is cogent, she is persuasive, and she is consistent in her message. And the message is not that we don't have sympathy for the Palestinian people, but they have to have a government representing them who will deal realistically and honestly with the state of Israel.
Somebody said on Twitter yesterday, and yes, Twitter can be useful, they said, liberals call people who believe in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms terrorists in this country, but they call terrorists, Hamas terrorists, who are throwing Molotov cocktails, putting women and children at risk, they call them protesters. How ironic.
Speaking of this issue, I'm wondering this, having spent some time in Washington, there's kind of this bizarre phenomenon where it appears that President Trump more faithfully follows the agenda he campaigned on, like it or not,
right, he does,
than any politician I can remember, really. You see all what appears to be chaos around this White House. You know how hard it is when you get down there to stay focused on the issues he campaigned on.
Sure.
This is another one of those promises kept. How does he do this?
I think, honestly, the biggest source of friction for the president, aside from, yes, we can all talk about how he's quite free to speak his mind on Twitter. We all know that, and sometimes that may create a certain amount of turbulence as well. But really, honestly, it's the fact that we don't have a governing majority in the Senate. And the Senate continues not to relinquish the filibuster on passing legislation. And that has meant these impasses, because they can't get 60 votes. They only have 51 Republican votes, 52 at best. And that's been the problem. The legislative agenda has been grinding.
The question is then, does that get solved come November? Let's turn to the primaries. President Trump's favored candidates, Lou Barletta in Pennsylvania and Deb Fischer in Nebraska, won their respective Senate primary elections last night. Female candidates scored victories in Pennsylvania's primary races, with at least 3 Democratic women favored to win House races in November. Nan, Dr. Congresswoman, your response to that?
I think it's marvelous to see, as a woman who managed to get elected to Congress, it's marvelous to see women not being held back by their gender. And I think we now need to move post-gender. We need to look at policies, because those mean the most. You can elect somebody whom you'd want to be your best friend, but if the policies are going to be wrong, then you have to vote regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity. Vote for the person who's going to promote the policies that will help all of us to rise. And those are the Republicans.
What are your thoughts on the women are making great headway in this election season, but it's mostly been on the Democratic side, as Dagan mentioned. So I'm just wondering, how do we get more women on the Republican side and we get, excitement around that?
Sure. Well, and having been a Republican woman, obviously, in elective politics, Republicans welcome. They are eager to see women involved in this process. So I know there's no institutional bias against women. I do think that there has been just less entry by relatively conservative women into politics. And I think there are a lot of factors that go into that. And one of them is that, if you're looking broadly, broad strokes, women on the Republican side tend to be focused on hearth and home, perhaps for a few more years.
They also have to have some seriously tough skin.
Yes, we do.
Not exactly welcoming.
You know what? Yes. We all have tough skin. We all have tough skin.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
You do have to. But that aside, honestly, we've got wonderful Republican women running, and Hillary supported the man against me, so.
There you go. Nan, thank you. Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, doctor and friend.